Tarnum. Whenever I've been talking about the ancient history in the Might Magic franchise, he seems to make appearance in the said timeline or video. So yeah, this is the dedicated Tarnum episode I have been talking about, making for a while. But if you like lore videos and speedrun videos, then why not hit that subscribe button and click the bell in order to get notified when I upload a new video. This was something I wanted to cover since my ancient history timeline video, because in that, Tarnum just kinda seems to reappear and disappear for a certain period of time. So some basic information before we start talking about his story. He's the main character for the Chronicles series and makes an appearance in Heroes of Might and Magic 4. So what is going on with Tarnum? Well, Tarnum is one of the two characters in the Might and Magic franchise that has seemingly gotten immortality, the other one being Gavin Magnus. Undead and creatures who inherently cannot be killed, not counted among the immortal numbers. What is the cause for him to not be able to die? Well, the ancestor caused him not to be able to die. Unlike Gavin Magnus, the immortality that was probably made by a spell, Tarnum gets rejected from entering paradise by the ancestors due to his actions. But what are these actions that made Tarnum get rejected passage to paradise? For that, we need to head back to the time of Jarg the Conqueror. During Jarg's time, Antagarish was ruled by the wizard kings of Bracadun. During his youth, Jarg was able to unite all the barbarian tribes in the western Antagarish. Jarg's horde was supposedly the strongest ever mustered in the known history of the continent, and with it, he was able to destroy the Empire's domination over Antagarish. But the Empire of Bracadun would regain their dominance over the continent due to infighting occurring due to Jarg's son. Jarg's story would have been lost if it weren't for bards, since the wizards tried to remove Jarg from history due to his opposition, and the story of the bards would inspire a young shepherd. Tarnum's campaign started with a noble intention of freeing the barbarians from the wizards of Bracadun. Set his sights on Rabak, the current leader of the barbarian, for the reason that if Tarnum claims Rabak's head, he'll be able to take the mantle of the barbarian king, which he succeeds in doing, unifying the barbarian tribes. Tarnum takes the mantle of Barbarian King, and by doing this is branded a criminal by the Wizard Kings. It's not known how long Tarnum's campaign against Bracadun was, but after the death of his beloved, Tarnum's noble intention becomes a quest of blood and revenge, enslaving the Mudlanders and burning villagers branded as traitors in order to keep his campaign going. After months of campaigning and battles, his advisors express their hope to go back home, but Tarnum doesn't listen. Obsessed with taking the fortress of Steelhorn. To avoid a rebellion, he had his advisors poisoned. The wizards of Bracadun are framed for the poisoning of the advisor, which in turn makes Tarnum's army into a bloodthirsty horde. Victory at hand, Tarnum had turned into everything he despised in the wizard. Sometimes later, after the fall of Bracadun, survivors of Bracadun fled to the north and founded the Kingdom of Arathia. Tarnum sets another campaign to conquer the younger kingdom, but is slain by the Arathian king Rion Griffinheart, and that is how he meets his first death and meets the ancestor. The ancestors were conflicted to let Tarnum into paradise, for he saved the barbarians' people's history, but he has committed several atrocities. As the ancestors sent some great potential in him, they sent him back to life as an immortal. He was then forced to do their bidding, performing great acts of good before they would let him enter paradise. And that's how Tarnum was turned into an immortal, and why he appeared and disappeared throughout the time. But that's only the beginning of his story. The next adventure for Tarnum would be Conquest of the Underworld, which is the second part of the Heroes Chronicles series. And the ancestor sends Tarnum back to life in order to save Rion's Griffinheart's soul after it was taken from paradise, as well as guarding Alison Griffinheart as a main task. Tarnum sets out in order to save Rion's Griffinheart's soul under the orders of Alison Griffinheart and heads head first into the Underworld, where Tarnum learns that he needs to obtain the Orb of Inhibition to proceed. The artifact is craftfully hidden and the tunnels of the terrible maze, so he knows it will be hard to find. As Tarnum delves deeper into the Underworld, one of his scouts, Mensor, figures out that Tarnum is the Barbarian King, and he figures this out due to a lie that Tarnum set up, which was that the knight who squired him only had 2 squires, that being his sons. Eventually, Tarnum and Queen Alysanne stumbles upon a demon, or a Cregan, by the name of Duke Dieselsig, who had his eyes restored due to an artifact that he managed to take before Tarnum got to it. Duke Dieselsig makes a deal with Alysanne, and that deal is that she's allowed to use his troops. But this just turns out to be a trick by Dieselsig, as Alysanne's captains are killed, Alysanne are captured, and Tarnum was left in a vegetative state, but since he's immortal, that doesn't really matter. Tarnum would eventually succeed in rescuing Alysanne from the demons, and eventually would return Rion's Griffinheart's soul to paradise. But then we have the next chronological event taking place in Tarnum's story, which is Revolt of the Beastmasters. The ancestor sends Tarnum to save the Mudlanders from Erathian slavers. Tarnum's first obstacle would be Lord Unstan. Unstan was supposedly even cruel by the standards of the Erathians, who were the slavers. Tarnum would rally the Mudlanders in order Unstan tries to keep them in check. After the defeat of Lord Unstan, the Erathian lords grew more concerned about the slave rebellion and sends Lord Pelgan to end the rising rebellion. Baron Pelgan fled from his castle when Tarnum's army approached it, so they followed him when Baron fortified himself in another. And while this is happening, the King of Erathia is setting a bounty on the heads of all of slaves, for 10 silver pieces each. This would leave mass graves that haven't even been found until the reckoning. Baron Pelgan offers up half his wealth to Tarnum in order to be spared. After defeating Baron Pelgan, Tarnum realizes that the Mudlanders require a more wise and more compassionate leader, so he appoints Droglo to be the leader after this war. The King of Erathia sends Earl Rambert and his son Nivian in order to stop Tarnum's invasion. Earl Rambert's forces would eventually be defeated, and Nivian would be taken prisoner from the battle that would ensue. Tarnum and Droglo tries to convince Nivian about the damage and the harsh treatment that the slaves have been receiving under Erathian rule. They manage to convince Nivian about the Erathian treatment and switches sides. Now Tarnum with Nivian goes to fight Earl Rampart again to save Adamina, and other wise women, from being executed. After a long fought battle, Nivian and Droglo free the wise woman while Tarnum finishes off Earl Rampart's forces. While preparing to take the fight to the Mad King of Erathia, Tarnum took direct command over the barbarians to help the fight ahead. The wise woman decided to name the new nation of the former Mudlanders into Tatilia. Now comes the final fight. Prince Nivian joins Tarnum to free both the Mudlanders and Erathian from the Mad King's influence. This makes it so that the Mad King forces needs to rely on mercenaries and rogues as his main part, while the wise women were naming the new nation of the Mudlanders. Back in Erathia, Nivian had gathered the nobles' support in order to and made them agree that the Mad King had dragged their once proud nation into dishonor. This would eventually lead to Nivian being crowned the new King of Erathia. The forces of the Mad King is eventually defeated, but an assassin dressed as a monk attempts to assassinate Nivian, but is saved by Droglo. With the battle over now, Droglo finds an old statue of a barbarian tyrant and recognizes Tarnum as the tyrant. Tarnum realized that he wouldn't want to hear his story and why he wanted to help, and leaves him with this. If a man, a king, made many terrible mistakes, do you think he should have the chance to redeem himself? And is taken back by the ancestors. The next chronological appearance that Tarnum makes is in Masters of the Elements. Tarnum is sent by the ancestor to Brakada in order to help Gavin Magnus stop the elemental lords from destroying Enroth. Tarnum is appointed the leader of an magical expedition into the elemental planes, and he also decides that a good offense is a good defense, as his barbarian mind usually tells him. After being able to take control over a conflux, Tarnum is able to gain the knowledge from the conflux so that he can enter in the elemental plane of air. In the plane of air, it seems like the sprites are the slaves of the elemental lord of air. Tarnum, who grew up as a slave, he decides we free him, and also learns that the elemental lords have left the plane and is currently unknown where they are. And then eventually Tarnum enters into the plane of water and realizes that he can't return the way that he came from. The only way for them to return to their own plane is to control all the elemental planes. So they began to try to set that up. It turns out that the sprites in the plane of water willingly follow the elemental lord here of water, and it turns out that the elemental lord of water is also away from his plane. They are eventually ending up in the plane of earth, and Tarnum's forces discover that there's solid ground, but it feels like they're walking around with weights. They find a wizard named Remus, who says he has been here for 16 years, but one of the wizards knows of an expedition that disappeared 200 years ago. That means the elemental plane's time passed slower in a ratio which is almost 12.5 years in the elemental plane. They would eventually reach the plane of fire after taking control of the plane of earth. When they reach the plane of fire, they realize that demons serve the elemental lord here. They also believe that there is another plane, the plane of magic. This idea of the plane of magic is brought up by Remus, who have been speculating that there might be another plane. After leaving the elemental planes, they realize 30 years has passed. Tarnum manages to defeat the elemental lords and wants the magic elemental to erase the knowledge of how to travel to the elemental planes. Okay, so this is the part where I said I didn't finish the video in time because I kinda got busy with my actual work. So I'm gonna be making a part 2 of this